BBC4 Collections, specially chosen programmes from the BBC archive. For this collection, Sir David Attenborough has chosen documentaries from the start of his career. More programmes on this theme and other BBC4 collections are available on BBC iPlayer.
Australia is full of fascinating, unique animals. I suppose the kangaroo is the most famous of them. But there are many other creatures, insects, birds, and reptiles, which are also unique to Australia and which occur nowhere else in the world. This country, the Northern Territory, has more than its fair share of them. We've been here now for over 3 months, and we've managed to see quite a number of them. As always, the most productive place to search for animals is around water. Few creatures can live without it. And up here, there are great swamps that attract an enormous variety of birds. In the trees that fringe the lagoons perch splendidly coloured bee-eaters, which come here to catch the insects hovering above the surface of the tepid water. On the shore, one of the scavengers of the territory, a kite that has found some carrion and is having some difficulty in dealing with it. And of course, there are ducks of all sorts. These handsome creatures are Rajah shelduck, or, as they're called out here, Burdekin ducks. Egrets and herons of many different kinds also throng the lagoons. These are pied herons. There are several sorts of ibis here too. This is the white ibis. And this, the glossy ibis, probing in the mud with their long curved beaks in search of insects. And the biggest of all the birds on the lakes, the brolga, the Australian crane, 4 feet tall with a 7-foot wingspan. Many of these birds, like this great white heron, have come here to feed on fish. And there are lots of fish in these billabongs, including the big barramundi, which is the finest tasting fish in the whole territory. But this, I was fairly certain, was not a fish. There was no dorsal fin on its back, and it was swimming close to the surface and in a most unfish-like way. What was it? I went round to the part of the shore for which it was heading to find out. And this is what it was, a goanna, a very large lizard. To be honest, goannas are not particularly dangerous. They don't have a poisonous bite. But all the same, they have been known to go for people when cornered, and as they have extremely powerful claws and quite formidable teeth, I thought it best to take no risks and keep a stick handy to fend him off if he did go for me. One of their methods of attack is to slash their tail like that. And that. And I dare say that that could be quite a painful blow if you got it across the shins. I expect this one was down by the lake looking for frogs or birds' eggs or maybe carrion. He can have few, if any, natural enemies, and he certainly didn't seem in the least afraid of me. But eventually, I became too persistent, and then he was off. He went to seek safety back in the lagoon from which he had come. His long, pink, forked tongue, like that of a snake, is not, of course, poisonous. It's simply a way of smelling, of tasting the air, as it were. The name goanna is simply a corruption of the word iguana, which, strictly speaking, is a South American type of lizard. But these lizards are quite different. They're a kind of monitor lizard related to the water monitor of Asia and the big Komodo dragon of Indonesia, which is the largest lizard in the world. From the tip of his tail to his head, this goanna was about 4 feet long. But there are goannas that grow to be 6 feet or more in length. Goannas, in fact, are the largest lizards in Australia, but there are lots of little ones too. And one of the most grotesque of them all is this little creature, the thorny devil. It's only about 4 inches long. We found a pair of them in the central desert, skittering about in the grass of the dunes. These creatures seem to be able to live on next to no water and get all the moisture they need from dew. At the back of their necks, they have a curious growth, which is a sort of satchel of fat, which can be absorbed during a bad season. Though they look ferocious and terrifying, particularly in close-ups like this, they are, in reality, quite harmless. Their mouths are too small to give you a bite, and their only defense is this astonishing armory of spines, which must make them, I imagine, a pretty unpleasant mouthful for anything like a hawk or a snake, which might try to make a meal of them. They eat only ants, and indeed not any old ants, but ants of a particular kind and size. Their mouths are too small to allow them to tackle anything but quite tiny ants. But though the ants they eat are minute, they consume enormous quantities of them, as many as 1,500 in a single meal, which must, I imagine, be a fairly long drawn-out affair. But there are plenty of ants everywhere in Australia. In fact, there are lots of insects of all sorts, and wherever you go, you see spectacular monuments to insect activity. This is a termite hill. Termites are sometimes called white ants, though it's not a particularly good name for them, because although they may look like ants, they're in fact not closely related at all. And termites, or white ants, are one of the plagues of the tropics. There are many different species, but most of them are extremely destructive. They'll chew their way through pretty well anything, through boots, through whole libraries of books, through wood, through the foundations of houses until they collapse. They've even been known to eat entire billiard balls. In fact, there's a good Australian expression to be white-anted by somebody. And that means that somebody has removed your foundations surreptitiously and eaten them away until you collapse. This particular sort of termite is a very unusual and indeed a puzzling one. It occurs nowhere else in the world but in this part of northern Australia. This is a magnetic termite hill. From this angle, it looks a large, flat object. But if you go and look over there, you get a completely different point of view. You can see that it's extremely thin, that in fact it's a sort of gigantic knife blade. Now this is pretty odd in itself because most termite hills are round. But it's even odder because all the termite hills like this kind point directly north and south with the accuracy of a magnetic compass, from which they get their name, magnetic termite hills. Termites build nests because they're very particular about the sort of climate, the sort of conditions under which they live. They don't like it too moist, they don't like it too dry. They can't bear the light of the sun. And inside their nests, in the darkness, they can create their own climate, as it were. But as to why this particular species should build it pointing exactly north and south has long been a problem. At first it was suggested that it was because there is a prevailing wind here which comes from the north and which can be very strong. And if they were building them the other way, well, then the wind might blow over the termite hill. This way, it presents the least resistance to the wind, and so is least likely to be blown over. But that theory is no longer accepted. The accepted belief now is that the termites build it this way because they are inclined to get too hot in these hills, and that in the morning, as now, when the sun is shining on the eastern side, well, the termites go into the shade on the other side of the hill, and then when the sun goes round in the evening, they'll migrate to this part of the nest. Well, we can at least see if they're behaving this way by chopping a hole in this side. Well, there are one or two termites there, but that you would expect, because these are one particular sort of caste of termite that lives in this hill. These are the soldier termites, and you would expect them to come when you attack their home with an axe, because these are the ones that come to repel boarders. These are the soldier caste. What we haven't seen here are the smaller, soft-bodied, white worker termites, which are the ones that you would expect to seek the shade. Let's see if we can find them on this other side. Well, here are some soldiers, and very many more than there were on the other side. And here are the white ones. Here are the little soft-bodied white caste of termite that are the ones you would expect to seek the shade. And there's a soldier trying to drag one of these soft, helpless creatures back into the shade, away from the light, which they so detest. So it's true. The little white ones really are on this side, on the west, in the shade, in the coolness. But whether that is the complete explanation for this extraordinarily shaped hill always pointing north, I'm not so sure, because after all, the shade on a termite hill, even if it's a circular one. For me, the puzzle of these orientated termite hills still remains. And in case you're worried about the termites and the hole I've made in their nest, well, they'll be all right. In 24 hours, they'll have sealed off all these galleries, and once again, the colony will be in darkness. You can't walk in this sort of bush for long without seeing a kangaroo. But it's not easy to get a good view of them, for they're very shy, nervous creatures. Actually, there are many similar-looking creatures, all of which most of us would call simply kangaroos. But to the expert, there are several very different sorts, with different names, like wallaby, wallaroo, euro, as well as kangaroo. These, in fact, are wallabies. It gets extremely hot up here, and water away from the lagoons is scarce. One of the ways the kangaroos keep themselves cool is to lick their forearms, just as this one is doing. It's the equivalent of mopping your brow with a wet sponge. But they must drink sometimes, and down in the south, in the desert, kangaroos will dig holes in the sand so that water can soak through and accumulate in a puddle. When they're at rest, they use their tail as a third leg, sitting back on it like a racegoer on a shooting stick. But when they run, they hold it out stiffly behind them and use it as an excellent balancing device. Kangaroos, of course, are marsupials. That is to say, creatures that carry their young in a pouch. But there are many other marsupials in Australia beside the kangaroo. Pouched rats and pouched mice, pouched cats and pouched anteaters. And on our walks through the bush, I kept a sharp lookout for them. Well, that up there is a pretty unusual sight. That's a possum. Actually, possums are not a very good word for it because the word is used for all sorts of very different sorts of animals. Possum originally is an American Indian word and was used by the settlers in North America for a rat-like creature, which in fact is also a marsupial. When people came here, they applied this word possum to this rather enchanting little creature sitting up there, which is very different indeed from the possum of North America. The local native people here call it a wick, and maybe that would be a better word. This particular possum is found all over Australia, not only up here in the top end, but way down south too, and it is almost entirely vegetarian. It spends its time chewing the leaves and the fruit, and it also will look for honey and sometimes birds' eggs, which it finds in these trees. It's an unusual sight because it's really a nocturnal animal. That's to say, it spends most of the day sleeping in a hole. So you don't often see them sitting around like that one up there. And perhaps it's fortunate that no one else is seeing them, because the people around here eat this creature. They regard it as a very tasty delicacy. He's not moving very much, precisely because he's a nocturnal animal. During the day he finds it a bit hot, and he'll probably stay there for the rest of the day, and then when night time comes, well, he'll probably go down and start snuffling around for food. So he won't do much. He's rather sleepy, and I think we'll probably just leave him up there. That magnificent flock of birds is a flock of galahs, rose-breasted cockatoos. Beautiful creatures with pink undersides and grey backs. Australia is a marvellous country for birds of the parrot family, parrots and parakeets and cockatoos, and there are many that are more gaudy than that, but not many that are more beautiful. The galah itself actually is very common. And indeed, it's something of a pest. It's extremely noisy, and it eats the crops. And so there's an expression here, people often call a man a galah. That means he's noisy and talkative and not much good for anything. Although they're so common, the galahs aren't shot for food because they're extremely tough. In fact, they say that the only way to cook a galah is to put it in a billy with a steel axe head, and then you boil it until the axe head's soft enough to stick a fork into, and then your galah is eatable. But what marvellous birds they are. Hear that? That's the call of a kingfisher-like bird called the kookaburra. Down in the south, the kookaburra has a hysterical laugh for a call. But up here, well, it's rather different. In fact, they say the country up here is so harsh that everything bites except the butterflies, and even the laughing jackass, the kookaburra, hasn't got anything to laugh at. Although animals are in fact abundant here, you can often walk for hours and even days without seeing anything very interesting. The fault is usually your own. You move too clumsily and noisily, or your eyes are not sharp enough. Sometimes you can look for one particular thing that's really quite common, and it may take you weeks to find it. It certainly took us a long time before we eventually discovered this. This strange construction is the work of one of the most extraordinary birds in the world, the bowerbird. And this is his bower. In front lies a huge collection of white objects. Most of them are snail shells bleached by the sun, but there are also little bits of white bone, a few quartz pebbles, one or two chips of glass, goodness knows where he got those from, all of them white. And at the back, two parallel walls of twigs forming an avenue. Bowerbirds are relatives of the birds of paradise, which occur north of here in the big island of New Guinea. But whereas the male bird of paradise has magnificent, spectacular plumes with which to display in front of his mate, the bowerbird is a relatively drab little creature, a brownish creature with about the size of a thrush with a little bit of pink at the back of its neck. So he can't display with plumes, but what he displays with is this treasury of articles which he collects at his bower. This isn't a nest, it's simply a place where he displays. Different species of bowerbirds have different tastes in what is most desirable and attractive for the jewels, if you like, to decorate his display ground. And this one prefers white objects. Now, if you want to attract a bowerbird, and there he is now, so he's around here. If I want to bring him down here, I've got in my hand some red seeds that I've got from a tree just nearby, and he can't abide these, so if I put these in his bower, I hope that he'll come down and whip them out as soon as I put them there. Let's see. And here he is. And there go 4 of the red seeds which he hates so much. Only the cockbirds make these bowers. Occasionally, the hen bird will come here too. Mostly, she just watches. But when she feels the moment is right, she will mate with the male here within the bower. But the place must be kept spick and span by the cockbird, ready for that occasion. Later on, the birds will make a nest which may be some distance away. It's built afresh each year. But the bower is kept from season to season. If you live in this country, it can be useful to know where the bowers are, because if you drop something bright and shiny like a coin, you can be pretty sure that within a day or so, the local bowerbird will have collected it and added it to his treasure. There's even a story that an old bushwhacker lost his glass eye while out riding, and he found it a couple of days later, staring up at him from the middle of a bower. No other bird shows such a passion for building and decorating as does the bowerbird. It's one of Australia's marvels. Week after week, we wandered through this bush, for there was one last creature which I'd not yet seen, and one which I was determined to find before we left Australia. Everywhere we went, we passed these huge termite hills, which can stand as high as 20 or 30 feet. It's astonishing to think that these gigantic towers are just the work of tiny insects less than half an inch long. How long it takes them to build these vast nests, no one knows for certain, but it must be many years. But termite hills were not what I was looking for. I was searching for a reptile which is not particularly rare, but yet, search as we might, we couldn't find it. It seemed as though our luck was out. Day after day passed fruitlessly, and then, at long last, our luck changed. And there is the lizard I wanted to see more than any other. It's the most spectacular of the entire lizard tribe in this part of the world. It's the frilled lizard. It may not look very spectacular now because it's got a big frill of skin around its neck which is folded up, but just as I get closer, it will get alarmed and will display, I think, and show this big fan trying to terrify me. The easiest way to catch him would be to throw a cloth over him, but since I haven't got a cloth, I'll just have to use my shirt. Got him! Well, this wonderful frill around his neck, like an Elizabethan ruff, is in fact just thin skin covered in scales which under his chin are a lovely red colour. It's strengthened by bones, little thin bones which come from beneath his jaw down here, and with those he can spread it out. In fact, the arrangement is such that he can only spread it out fully by opening his lower jaw, so that the total effect of suddenly baring your jaws and spreading out your frill, your fan, your ruff, is really altogether quite terrifying. He uses it to scare off intruders just like me, but also the two male frilled lizards use it when they are battling in competition for a female. But although he may look so ferocious, he's not particularly so. He doesn't have a poisonous bite. He lives mostly, in fact, on flies and small insects. And he makes quite a good pet. In captivity, he lives on eggs and raw meat. He is, I think, one of the most spectacular of all the lizards in the world, but we still haven't seen, perhaps, one of the most extraordinary of his habits. And that is, when I let him go, he will run away, no doubt, and if he does, I think that he will probably rear up on his hind legs and run on his two back legs, rather like a miniature dinosaur. Anyway, I'm going to let him go now, and I only hope he shows us how to do it. Go on. Shoo, go on. Shoo. Shoo. Surely he must be one of the oddest of all lizards. I was glad that at last we had found him, for without seeing him, our trip through the Northern Territory wouldn't have been complete, for me at least.